be screwed, feel my own adrenaline. Yeah, I do just what I do, and I hope you let me in, yeah.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the third part of, What If Harry Potter Meets My Little Pony? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of tkepner on fanfictionnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. The next morning was a repeat of the previous morning, waking up early and realizing it would be hours before breakfast arrived. And then he realized he had fallen asleep instead of meditating the previous night. After a sigh of resignation, he started again. He was going to learn magic. No matter how boring parts of it might be. About the fifth time a memory of the Dursleys intruded into his attempt at clearing his mind, he decided to visualize pushing that memory into a box to get it out of the way. If it was in a box, he wouldn't think about it. After repeating that dozens of times, he heard the door open. Opening his eyes, he saw Nurse Redheart come in with his breakfast. Only after she left and he restarted his meditations did he realize that the memories he had put away really were not coming back. He visualized opening the box and his mind was flooded with all the things he had been trying not to think about. He wondered if that's what he needed to do, put all his memories in boxes. The most persistent memories were the ones with the Dursleys, so he started shoving those into a new box as fast as he could remember them. After a dozen, he had to retrace his steps and break the box into 4, one for each Dursley and Aunt Marjorie. School memories started to pop up, but they usually involved Dudley doing his best to isolate Harry. Those became a 5th box. His fears and memories about where he currently was he tentatively placed in a 6th box. The 3 girls, no they were fillies, went into another box. Theories and concerns about magic became yet another box. He didn't realize how much time had passed as he did this until he heard the door open again. This time it was the nurse with his lunch. He had been at this for over 4 hours. At the same time, he felt calmer than he had ever felt before. And his mind felt clearer as well. Well, if nothing else at least he didn't have to worry about those unpleasant memories cropping up randomly anymore. After lunch Dr. Wellhart stopped by and checked his arms, forelegs. He seemed quite impressed. After he left, Harry once again lost himself in his memories and organizing them. This time it was the loud clatter of multiple hooves sliding to halt outside his door that attracted his attention. That and a loud voice bellowing, "No" running in the halls, followed by an equally loud, and higher-pitched, voice saying, "We weren't running, we were hurrying." A different voice followed, yelling, "Quiet. This is a hospital not a hoofball field." His door slowly opened and, as he had expected, the 3 fillies walked in. "Wow," said Scootaloo, shaking her head, "what a bunch of grouches." "Well, they are right, you know," Sweetie Belle said, "you shouldn't run in the hospital unless it's an emergency. And some pony might be trying to sleep." Apple Bloom rolled her eyes as she said, "Hiya, Harry, how are you feelin' today?" "I'm fine," he said. "How was school?" "Boring." "Okay. Diamond Tiara is an idiot." They stared at each other for a minute. Scootaloo started fidgeting. Harry said, "You know, you don't have to come see me every day after school if you don't want to." "Well," said Scootaloo, "it is kinda boring when you can't really do anything except lie there." She got a calculating look in her eyes. "Although it was fun pulling on those ropes of yours," she said, eyeing the ropes now and clearly getting ready to jump up on the bed. "Oh," said Apple Bloom, "I almost forgot." The other 2 looked at her and echoed her with an "oh," and "oh, yeah." Cheerily, "Our teacher is coming by this afternoon. That's why we were in a rush to get here, to let you know she was coming," Apple Bloom concluded. Scootaloo jumped up on the bed. "Aha," affirmed Sweetie Belle. "She said she has to evaluate your education so she'll know what you need to learn." Scootaloo walked up to one of the ropes and studied it, the pulley it ran through, and where the ropes were tied to his casts. "We told her you knew lots of maths and nothing about Equestria or the princesses, but she said she had to check herself," Apple Bloom finished. That started Harry thinking about what was going to happen to him after he got out of the hospital. Clearly, the adults figured he would be going to school, which distracted him for a moment as he wondered what kind of school it was. But then he wondered where he was going to stay. Would they put him in an orphanage? He put those thoughts away. There was nothing he could do about his situation except go with whatever happened. Changing the subject, he said, "What do you three do when you're not hanging around the hospital getting yelled at?" After a series of guilty looks, and Scootaloo had been reminded what had happened the last time they had played with his ropes, they started describing their numerous adventures in seeking cutie marks. They described their attempts at creature catching, chicken herding, chicken rescuing, carpentry, and zip-lining. The last two ended up with them covered in tree sap and pine needles, a frequent occurrence Harry would later discover. They were just starting a description of them trying duck-pin bowling when their teacher arrived. By this time all three were sitting on his bed. Like the nurses, Cheerilee was neither a Pegasus nor a unicorn. She had a purple coat with a pink and lavender mane. After a quick introduction she settled into quizzing him on what he knew. The Cutie Mark Crusaders, as the three fillies had named themselves, left not long afterwards, not that Harry could blame them. He would have left, too, if he could move. In all truth, he had to admit it wasn't that bad. The math was simple flashcards of increasing difficulty. The language lessons were similar, the spelling of many common words, reading sentences and finding the nouns, verbs, adjectives, and so forth. Naturally, he couldn't write anything, which surprised her somewhat as she expected him to use his mouth to move the quill. Magic was out as he still wore that ring on his horn. For geography, history, and government he knew nothing, again surprising her. Apparently, no one had told her he wasn't native to this world. He decided that if the princess had wanted that information widely known, she would have made sure everyone besides the doctor, nurse, her faithful student, and herself knew the truth. So, he said nothing about that and simply said he had never been taught those things. Although he did learn that there were three types of ponies, Earth, Pegasus, and Unicorn. The princess, she told him, was a special case. She was an alicorn, of which there were only three known, Celestia, Luna, and Mi Amore Cadenza. He also learned that there were, indeed, many other mythological races in this new world, including, but not limited to, griffins, dragons, trolls, centaurs, cockatrices, hydras, manticores, minotaurs, and phoenixes. Plus, there were several normal animals that could talk, such as buffaloes and cows. He didn't think he could ever look at a hamburger again if he knew he could have talked to the cow it came from. He shuddered at the thought. She was a nice mare, Harry decided, having given him proper names for ponies in general, and she concluded her testing well before dinner. However, just as she was leaving, Dr. Wellhart returned, bringing the purple unicorn mare, Twilight Sparkle, with him. "Harry," the doctor said, "your body's healing powers are amazing. If they continue as they have, then I see no reason not to remove your casts and release you tomorrow afternoon." Harry perked up at that welcome news, but just as quickly frowned as he wondered where he would go. The doctor smiled at him. "I know what you're thinking," he said warmly. He turned to Twilight and nodded. She said haltingly, "If you have no objections, Princess Celestia suggested that you could stay with me. It would make it easier for me to teach you about Equestria and magic." Harry stared at her. He really didn't have a choice, now did he? The princess could simply say, "You're living there," and that would be that. No one would dare contradict her. And he definitely wasn't in a position to defy authority. On the other hand, so what? It wasn't like he had ever really had the ability to make his own choices anyway, otherwise he never would have stayed with the Dursleys. At least this time the adults were pretending to give him the options. He looked up at her, and you could question, subject, about my world without any inconvenience. She blushed. He was amazed to see. How did she do that through fur? Well, yes, that too. She rushed on, but that's not the primary reason, honest. I want to make you as comfortable as possible here. She gave him a pleading look. She seemed honest, he thought. And if he said, no, where would he end up? Okay, he said, if you don't mind. She pranced in place for a moment, looking very pleased. Excellent. Spike and I will prepare a nice spot for you to sleep. She gave him a broad smile. Dr. Wellhart says everything should be finished by 3 tomorrow, so I'll see you then. She turned and rushed out of the room. Harry gave the doctor a puzzled look. The pony shook his head. And they say I don't have good pony skills. He grinned at Harry. She's a good pony, I'm sure you'll have a great time living at the library. Library? Oh, yes, you don't know about that, do you? Harry looked at him blankly. Her home is Ponyville's Golden Oak Library, and she's the librarian. That was awesome on many levels, Harry realized. As long as he could read books, he would be happy even if locked into a cupboard. And if he wasn't locked in a cupboard, then so much the better. Living with her couldn't be worse than the Dursleys. He realized he was actually looking forward to moving in with her, now. But what was the princess's personal and faithful student doing running a library? Something was up with that. He would expect the personal student of the ruler to be groomed for a much more prestigious position. And yet, here she was, a lowly librarian. His business concluded, the doctor left. Harry returned to his meditations. He felt he was actually starting to make progress. He could actually keep his mind blank for seconds at a time. The next day was a productive one for Harry. By the time the doctor came by and removed the Colt's casts, Harry finally had managed to meditate for several minutes and caught the barest glimmer of a glow when he had tried to look at his horn with his eyes closed. Of course, that could also have been his imagination, seeing a glow that was really the sunlight coming in his window and making a pattern on the inside of his eyelids. Only time would tell. In the meantime, he had organized his memories to an amazing degree and found that his memories of school were much sharper than they had ever been. He could almost see the print in the books he had read in class, and hear the teacher's words as they spoke. He still had a long way to go, but the more he did the faster he became at doing it. And the clearer all the memories became. The downside of that was that he had far more unhappy and depressing memories than good ones, with their attendant emotions of humiliation and pain. And there you go, Harry, Dr. Wellhart said as the last section of cast came off his left arm leg. Harry just laid there for a moment, lifting and lowering his new legs, watching closely as he tried to figure out how they worked. When he bent what he thought was his wrist, it was a lot farther up the leg than he had expected, at a place he had first thought was his elbow. He closed his eyes and bent his wrist, then opened them to see he had been correct. It was what he thought was his elbow doing the bending. When he moved his elbow, a joint almost at his chest moved. Above that was his shoulder. The space between them couldn't have been more than the width of his tiny hoof, much shorter than he was used to seeing between his shoulder and elbow. He worked his way back down to the hoof, trying to bend things. When he got below his wrist, if he closed his eyes, it felt like he was bending his middle finger. Thinking of that area as a finger, he tried to hook his legs together and feel how hard they pulled against each other. It was kind of odd, but he could see how he could grasp things that way. But still, he had at least 3 more joints between his shoulder and his hoof. The doctor watched, apparently fascinated in his explorations. The stallion raised his eyebrows as Harry used his arm legs to push himself into a sitting position. It was very awkward for Harry, and he had the urge to lean forward onto his front hooves the way dogs and cats sometimes sat with their tails curled around their paws. Unsure of what to expect, Harry carefully lowered his rear legs towards the floor and slid off the bed. Again, it was awkward, but by turning to his side he was able to lean against the bed while standing up. Cautiously, He balanced on his legs and took a tentative step beside the bed. Both doctor and nurse were watching him intently, and wide-eyed, the doctor even taking notes on his clipboard. The nurse was both amazed and confused at what he was doing. Too focused on learning to walk with his new body, Harry paid them no attention. Attempting to stand and walk without toes to flex and provide balance was a trial. He swayed and staggered a few times just trying to stand still, but his hooves seemed to grip the floor quite well. He was surprised to notice, almost like they had suction cups on them instead of simply a hard hoof fingernail. He found himself using his leg muscles and shifting his hips to keep from falling. It must be somewhat like walking with very low stilts strapped to his legs, he decided. He made sure to stay close to the bed so he could grab it whenever he started to lose his balance. Still, after a few minutes struggling, he was starting to get the hang of it. He looked up and grinned at the two adults and immediately realized he had made a mistake. Even though he was a young colt, standing on his legs like this made him as tall as the stallion and taller than the mare in the room. Ponies don't walk on their rear legs. Oops, he said hesitantly. Sorry, he continued as he deliberately allowed himself to fall forward and catch himself with his hands' hooves. He shook his head. He was going to have to get used to calling things by their names here. 4 legs and 4 hooves. He paused and considered things. Were those puns? No, no problem at all, said the doctor. That was quite interesting. You were walking almost like a minotaur, and quite well indeed. Most ponies have difficulty just standing still that way, much less actually walking. Do you do that a lot? Harry hesitated. Well, everyone, Pony, here knew he came from somewhere else, but he wasn't sure if the princess or Twilight had told anyone else he wasn't naturally a pony. Yeah. He decided to leave it at that. Dr. Wellhart made a notation on his clipboard. Well, Twilight should be here any minute now. As if she had been waiting for her cue, Twilight trotted through the doorway behind the doctor. Hi, Harry, she said cheerfully. Oddly, Harry noticed she had dark bags under her eyes as if she hadn't had enough sleep, and her assistant Spike was nowhere in sight. I hope you're ready to go. She gave him a big smile. He immediately mistrusted it. No one smiled like that at him, not even the doctors or nurses. Yes, ma'am, he said meekly, looking down, avoiding meeting her eyes, and possibly provoking her. After all, while the doctors and nurses were supposed to be nice as a part of their job, she, as the faithful student of the ruler of this land, was under no such requirements. Great. Well, come along, there is so much we have to do today in getting you settled in. She wheeled around and left the room. Harry turned from beside the bed and started to follow her, only to end up in a faceplant on the floor. Oof. Ow. Trying to walk on your middle fingers and toes was a great deal more difficult than he had anticipated. It wasn't at all like crawling on your hands and knees. As he had discovered earlier, his elbows and knees were about mid-arm and mid-thigh, his wrists and ankles were where he would expect his elbows and knees to be. All those extra joints below them made it difficult to figure when he should move each one. Get one out of order, and his face met the floor. Trying to crawl failed spectacularly when you didn't use those extra joints. The hooves met the floor at weird angles and either bent wrong, and painfully, or simply skidded away. It might not be so bad on dirt where his hooves could get better traction, but on the wooden floors of this hospital it was far worse than trying to walk on an ice-covered path. Oh, cried the nurse, quickly coming forward and trying to help him stand, again. How she managed to help him back up without hands to grab him was a bit mystifying, but she did it. The doctor merely observed. Useless git. Slowly, one leg at a time, he took a step, lifting each leg a bit higher than he really needed. He didn't move the other 3 until the moving one was down and stable. He imagined he looked a bit like a cat he had once seen that someone had put little cloth boots over its paws. Taking high single steps instead of moving smoothly and elegantly across the floor. And looking completely ridiculous. But at least he wasn't falling down. With the nurse's help he made it into the hall. Twilight was nowhere in sight, clearly not realizing that he hadn't followed right at her heels. He sighed and sat a moment. "Thank you," he said softly to the nurse. She smiled down at him. "No problem, dearie," she said, "I'm here to help you." She patiently waited at his side. He took a deep breath and, placing a hoof against the wall to steady himself, slowly rose to his hooves. His rear hooves, that is. It was actually easier to balance on the 2 rear hooves than all 4 because he only had to concentrate on 2 instead of splitting his attention to 4. Walking upright would be quicker and have less face-meeting floor time. While he did have to worry about balance, that was a lesser evil. If he lost his balance on 2 legs, he simply let himself fall to all 4s. But if he started to fall from all 4s, then he didn't stop until his face met the floor. With the nurse pacing him, and him occasionally placing a hoof against her back for balance, he made it to the reception area of the hospital rather quickly. Much faster, he thought, than trying to do it on all 4s. The doctor, he noticed, trailed along behind him. He was, no doubt, taking notes and remaining useless. The reception area was almost deserted with only the receptionist to watch as he made his way across the room to the front doors. Just as he came close to the doors, though, he saw a frantic purple pony running up the outside ramp. Fortunately, she looked through the glass before barging inside. Eyes wide in surprise, she slowed and opened the door, staring at him and the nurse. He gave her a hesitant smile and hoped she wasn't too upset he hadn't been immediately behind her. If he wasn't exactly where Aunt Petunia expected him to be when they were walking, well, the less said about that the better. As when he was with his aunt, with the nurse beside him as a witness, the purple unicorn would remain cordial, although how she would react once they were behind closed doors he wasn't as optimistic about. "You're walking on 2 legs, she said wonderingly. "Why are you walking on 2 legs? He gulped. He hadn't thought that she would mind him doing that she might be embarrassed by him doing that. He quickly dropped back onto all 4 hooves. And promptly face-planted as he tried to approach Twilight. Before the nurse could move, a purple glow appeared around him and lifted him into the air just high enough for him to regain his hooves. "Oh, yes," she said, "I see. You aren't used to walking the way we do." She frowned a bit. As did the doctor on hearing what she said. He closed his eyes briefly. She wasn't happy. With magic, she could do things that Uncle Vernon had never thought to do. He felt his breathing become faster and shallower. Maybe living with her would be a big mistake. "How about this?" she suggested. "I'll put my field under you, and when you start to fall, I'll catch you. That way you can practice walking without getting hurt." She smiled happily, hopping back and forth between her front hooves. She wanted him to walk like a normal pony. Walking upright was forbidden. He nodded quickly. "Goodbye," he softly said to the nurse, "thank you for your help." "Goodbye," she replied with a smile. Harry knew she watched them as they slowly left the hospital behind. It was very strange to feel that light touch of Twilight's magic field. At first, it was a nearly constant struggle to stay upright, and he spent more time held up by her magic than walking on his hooves. While in the beginning she walked at a slow enough pace that he could easily keep up, but then she started talking. "I've told my friends about you," she said enthusiastically. "They can hardly wait to meet you." When they reached the foot of the ramp, she turned left, sped up a fraction, and dragged him along behind her. "They've all gathered at the library to wait for us." He had no time to look around at the nearby buildings or Ponyville's inhabitants, as he spent most of his energy, and eyes, on watching his hooves and trying not to slip up. "Oh, this is just so exciting," she said, speeding up again. His hooves barely had time to touch the ground before she moved him forward. One of Dudley's friends had had a small blow-up pool in their front yard one summer. Harry had watched from where he was weeding Tunia's flowers as the kid's dog had jumped into the pool. Dudley's gang had all laughed hysterically when one of them held the small dog over the water and the dog had started to paddle his feet as if he were swimming in the water instead of suspended. Over it. Harry felt something like that dog right now. He was moving his arms and legs as if he were walking, but the unicorn wasn't letting him put any weight on his legs. He felt really stupid at the whole situation. And yet at the same time he found her magic absolutely amazing, as it seemed to wrap entirely around his body like a blanket. Even your 3 filly friends are there. I've managed to get Pinkie Pie to tone things down to a small welcome party, but she's insisting that later she'll have a bigger party to introduce you to every pony. So, today's just a welcome to your new home party. I hope you don't mind. She sped up again. He gave up trying to walk and just curled his legs slightly above the ground. She was ignoring him completely as she talked, carrying him in her magic as if he were a package. He didn't even try to fake the appearance of walking, instead he stared at the odd buildings they passed and listened to her non-stop descriptions of her friends and how they met. She kept referring to these things called elements, how they reflected the personalities of her friends, and how proud she was of them. One building looked like a carnival carousel and was owned by her friend Rarity, whom he would meet at the library. She was very generous, it seemed. Another was like a giant gingerbread house with candies stuck all over it. Her friend Pinkie Pie worked there as a baker, she was always arranging parties and making ponies laugh. And she makes the best muffins and sweets you could ever want, Twilight had explained. Even the normal houses were odd, with roofs that looked like old-fashioned thatch, and walls that swept up in curves from the ground instead of straight verticals. There were bridges between some of the building that connected them on the first floors. Several looked like circus tents made out of wood with slanted walls and roofs that twisted and curved, and one even was shaped like a jester's cap, complete with round ball or other decorations at the top. These ponies clearly had never heard of the concept of a zoning board. And yet, somehow, nothing clashed. Everything seemed to fit together in a cohesive whole that just seemed right. By the time they reached her home, the library, she was cantering along at a good rate of speed. She was moving far faster than he could hope to move on his own at the moment. The library left him breathless with wonder. It was a giant tree with windows and balconies, and there were at least 4 floors inside. And from the greenery present, it was clear the tree was alive. How had they done that? She flung the door open and trotted inside. Once they were inside, she released him and he scrambled to stay on his feet at the unexpected drop. Fortunately, he managed to avoid face-planting again. She hadn't even noticed she had been carrying him instead of merely supporting him as he walked. Or else she had thought that carrying him was less embarrassing for her than having all the ponies watch as he stumbled and almost face-planted behind her. "We're here," she cried out cheerily as the door closed behind them. The only resemblance the inside of the tree bore to a library was that there were hundreds of books on shelves that seemed to be a part of the tree. The only table was in the middle of the room, and it was currently buried under platters of what looked like cupcakes and muffins. The room extended upwards for 2 floors, easily. He could see several lofts over the ground floor bookshelves with more books and the windows he had seen from outside. A banner hung across the opposite wall that said, "Welcome to Ponyville, Harry Potter." Crowded near the table were a bunch of ponies, and 3 fillies he easily recognized. A blue pony with a rainbow mane floated near one of the upstairs alcoves, slowly flapping its wings in an impossible feat that defied all laws of physics that he had read. He stared briefly. Before he could take in more, there was a pink mass in front of him and someone yelling, "Chai! I'm Pinkie Pie." She moved her leg out for a hoof shake, "You must be Harry Potter." "I'm so," the rest of what she was saying trailed off into silence. Harry, having an adult suddenly in his face, shouting, and throwing out their hand in what he could only assume was a punch, reacted as experience had taught him. He dropped to the floor in a tight fetal curl. He tucked his arms tight to his sides to cover his ribs and stomach. He covered his face with his hands, now hooves, for protection as he screamed, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I promise I'll never do it again." He waited, panting in panic, for the kick that inevitably came next. There was only silence. He peeked out from behind a hoof to see the pink thing was a pony with the most upset, horrified look he had ever seen, her mane hanging limp around her face. Twilight, the purple one, looked absolutely furious. Oh, God! He had embarrassed her in front of her closest friends. He whimpered, and with a few frantic kicks at the floor managed to hurl himself under a couch he hadn't even realized he had seen. There was more silence. He listened closely, shivering uncontrollably. His life most likely depended on knowing what was about to happen next. He should have known better than to expect things here to be different. At the Dursleys he knew the rules, here he didn't. He had no right to expect the rules to be different. Pinky, hissed Twilight in a partial whisper. I told you to be gentle and not to scare him. Yeah, Scootaloo quietly said, he's already tried to run through 2 walls the last time someone scared him. And that was Princess Celestia just being polite. What was that about? Demanded an unknown pony at the same time. I think I'm going to be sick, said another as she realized exactly what his reaction must mean. There were hoof steps coming towards the couch, so Harry wriggled a bit farther back from the couch front. A moment later, a yellow pony laid down in front of him, and then lowered her head to look under the couch. She had a light pink mane. It's all right, Harry Potter, she said softly. No one is going to hurt you, I promise. She had gentle air about her, and she seemed nice. There was something soothing about her mere presence that slowed Harry's racing heart and eased his panicked breathing. He could hear some hurried whispering going on above and behind the yellow pony. She smiled at him ruefully. Pinky is overwhelming when you first meet her. I know, because when I first met her, I didn't come out of my house for a week. I don't think she could hurt any pony, not even by accident. She just wants to be friends with everyone and loves to give parties for any reason you can imagine. And many you can't. Her voice was calm and soothing. She paused, then said, come on out, I promise you'll be safe. She continued coaxing in that vein for several minutes as Harry considered what to do next. The longer the yellow pony remained in front of him, the calmer he became, and he started to think again. He couldn't leave, he had nowhere to go, and knew nothing about this bizarre world he now found himself in. The princess had ordered Twilight to take care of him, so she wouldn't just let him escape, anyway. If he tried to run away, she would find him again, using her incredible magic, no doubt. Or just cast that scanning magic spell and follow the screams to where he was hiding. Purple Hooves walked over to the couch. He started shivering again. Twilight suddenly laid down beside her friend and looked under the couch at him. I'm not mad at you, Harry, she said softly. I'm angry at your relatives for treating you so bad. I've never seen any pony react like you did just now, for any reason. She sighed. I'm really sorry you were startled like that by Pinky. She really means no harm, she's just awfully enthusiastic about meeting new ponies and throwing them parties. She just wants to be friends with every pony, and to make every pony happy. Slowly, the two coaxed him into crawling out from under the couch. Only after he put his front hooves on the couch seat and pushed himself up to his hooves did he realize that he had once again automatically reverted to standing on 2 legs. He looked at the ponies with more than a bit of fear. He had forgotten that Twilight didn't want him walking on 2 legs. The 3 fillies were staring at him with awe, the adults were simply surprised. Twilight was looking at him with a calculating look that was directed more at his legs. The yellow pony wrapped one of her wings around his hips in a move that felt oddly comforting to him. Oh! Oh! Cried the pink pony, making Harry flinch. I can do that. Her long straight hair puffed up slightly. She promptly jumped up onto her rear legs and sauntered over to Harry as if she had grown up doing that. Just as he now towered over the fillies, she towered over her friends, and him. Much more calmly, smiling widely, she said, Hi, I'm Pinkie Pie. She slowly extended her right foreleg down to him. I'm so sorry I startled you, she said in a sincere apologetic tone, her expression changing to very sad. Hesitantly, he reached up and wrapped his finger around her hoof. It felt really weird to be doing a handshake with what amounted to his middle finger. But a full human handshake would have had him reaching halfway up her leg, all the way to the bend that on a human would be the wrist, but on a pony he would call it an elbow, while her actual elbow seemed to be somewhere near her chest. On the other hand, or hoof, if he turned his hoof around and lifted it sharply, he was giving someone the middle finger. He could feel that his other two fingers were somehow pressed against the knuckle joint of his middle finger. He could give every pony he met the middle finger and they would never suspect it. That brought a brief smile to his face. Encouraged, Pinky suddenly was offering him a cupcake in her other hoof. He stared at it in confusion. How was she holding it with only the concave base of her hoof? Tentatively he tried to take it in his hoof, wrapping his finger around it. It was very awkward, but he managed. He looked up at her and then over at Twilight, wondering if he could eat it. The purple unicorn nodded her head reassuringly. The yellow Pegasus nudged him, nodding as well. He took a small nibble. It had to be the best, sweetest, cupcake he had ever had. It was also the first cupcake he had ever had. Dudley had made sure of that. He couldn't help it as he looked over to the center table to see if there were more of those wonderful things, and hoped he might be allowed to eat one more. Said one of the fillies, Apple Bloom, he thought, you're not supposed to eat the paper cup, too. He looked at his empty hoof, then over at her. Oh, he said hesitantly, you're not. He shrugged. Tasted good, though. Pinky's eyes got big, or at least bigger than they were. Make the paper cups food, too? She started to hyperventilate. Harry wanted to take a step back, but his legs were already pressed against the couch behind him. Brilliant, she yelled, jumping into the air and hovering there for a second. She ran out of the tree house so fast she left a pink outline drifting in front of Harry for a moment and a streak of pink out the door. The door opened and closed so fast it was like a flashbulb going off as they briefly saw the bright sunshine outside. He blinked and looked at the other ponies. Twilight was face-hoofing while both the blue pony and the one standing beside Apple Bloom were just shaking their heads. The white one beside Sweetie Belle was rolling her eyes. The yellow one was standing beside him, still with her wing wrapped reassuringly around his hips so that he knew she was there and supported him. It helped keep him calm. He dropped back down to 4 hooves before Twilight got any madder at him for being on 2. She shifted her wing to drape across his back and rear legs, and hugged him slightly. Well, anyway, Twilight finally said, these are my friends. This is Rarity, she pointed to the white pony with a deep blue, almost purple, mane and tail. She owns and runs the Carousel Boutique, as I told you. And that's her sister, Sweetie Belle, beside her, whom you already know. Hello, my dear, the unicorn pony said with a cultured voice and delicate nod of her head. Harry managed a meek, nice to meet you, ma'am, back to her. He was not good at meeting adults. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia had made sure any adults he met were well aware of his reputation. At all such meetings he was usually met with suspicious hostility. Anything short of meek was considered rebellious and disrespectful. If not by the other adults, then by his aunt and uncle. This is Applejack, Twilight continued pointing to an orange pony with a yellow mane and tail and wearing a Stetson hat that was standing beside Apple Bloom. Like Apple Bloom she had neither wings nor horn. It was her orchard, Sweet Apple Acres, where you were found by Apple Bloom, Sweetie Belle, and Scootaloo. Apple Bloom is her sister. Howdy, that pony said, with the distinct American Western accent just like her sister Apple Bloom, but thicker. Harry wondered how that had happened. Why would these ponies have Southwestern Yankee accents? He nodded back to her and managed another meek, nice to meet you, ma'am. And I'm Rainbow Dash, fastest Pegasus in Equestria, the blue flying pony said excitedly, zooming closer. She quickly pulled back when she saw Harry flinch, crouch at the sudden movement, and edge back under the yellow Pegasus wing. Rainbow Dash had a multicolored mane and tail, and buzzed around the library like a huge hummingbird. Her wings, however, beat far slower than those a normal bird would need to do to stay aloft. Harry could only stare in amazement. Harry managed to squeak out a soft, hello, ma'am, blinking rapidly at the strange antics of the flying pony. The pony beside you is Fluttershy. Harry took another look at the yellow pony. She had a pink mane and tail. He smiled bashfully at her, and whispered, "Thank you. And you've already met Pinkie Pie." Twilight gave him a guilty look, "Sorry about her scaring you. She can be quite enthusiastic at times and doesn't realize how pushy she can be, sometimes." Harry simply nodded. It was best not to speak around adults unless they said something to him that he was supposed to respond to verbally. Nodding or shaking his head was always wiser. Fluttershy led the tetchy colt to the food-laden table and offered him another cupcake. The trip was not without pain, though, as his inexperience at walking on all fours dropped him on his face twice. He was sure he could have made the distance just fine on 2 legs, but he was afraid Twilight would get upset at him for his freakish ways. Fluttershy remained beside him, her wing across his back, nice and reassuring. "Hey, Twilight," he heard Rainbow Dash ask, "when did you get that couch? I don't remember seeing it there yesterday." Everyone turned and looked. To Harry's amazed recognition, the couch looked like a twin of the one in the Dursley sitting room, but much bigger. It towered over him, his head barely reaching the seating cushions. Looking at it, he had to wonder, how had he managed to fit underneath it in the first place? The sofa bed certainly didn't have a lot of room underneath the cushions. He sighed. Magic. Naturally. He was mystified as everyone else about the couch's presence, as well as where it could have come from. After all, he had a magic-killing ring on his horn, so he couldn't have done anything, right? He took the cupcake offered by Fluttershy and stuffed it into his mouth. It was odd, it was actually harder to stand on 3 legs while using the 4th to hold the cupcake than it was to just stand on 2 legs. He really wanted to stand up, but dared not anger Twilight. He quickly discovered that Scootaloo was Rainbow Dash's fangirl. After egging Dash on to tell Harry about her exploits, she listened avidly as the blue Pegasus bragged incessantly about her prowess as a flyer. Rainbow Dash, it seemed, was quite the braggart and awfully full of herself. She seemed to enjoy being the center of attention. The others listened and rolled their eyes, occasionally, but never said that what she said wasn't true. Based on how the other ponies nodded and seemed to back up her claims, she must have had the ability to live up to her bragging. An unusual combination to Harry's way of thinking. Most braggarts he had met actually had very little to brag about, making mountains out of bumps. More than once, though, Harry was puzzled to hear references to something called the element of loyalty. How loyalty fit a braggart left him shaking his head. He spent the next few minutes stuffing himself with cupcakes and muffins supplied by the yellow Pegasus. He only took what was offered and made no move to appropriate any on his own, doing that would lead to certain punishment. The apple juice she gave him was sweeter than any he had ever had, and he quickly polished off the first glassful. He watched as the others, even the adults, ate even more of the sugar-loaded foodstuffs than he did while he listened to Rainbow Dash pontificate on her greatness. He wondered if the ponies didn't have to worry about diabetes with all the sugar they were downing. Eventually, Twilight came over to them and asked if he'd like a brief tour of the library. He did, but worried if he would anger her with his clumsiness. He shuffled awkwardly on his hooves, not sure of how to answer without getting in trouble. Fortunately, Fluttershy once more came to his rescue and guided him along the tour, her wing draped over his back. She let him lean against her to provide a stabilizing influence. Almost directly opposite the front door and entryway was a winding staircase going up to one of the alcoves. "That's where my bedroom is," Twilight said. "It's also where Spike has his basket." At the mention of the dragon's name, Harry looked around and saw Spike standing beside the white unicorn, Rarity, looking up at her. From the look on his face, Harry suspected he was infatuated with the much older pony. He was also, to Harry's amazement, apparently eating a jewel. He looked back at the staircase, this time with a critical eye. Harry leaned sideways and examined the side of the staircase. The wall underneath the stairs seemed to be solid wood, as in the stairs were carved directly into the tree. There were no signs of a door, just more book-loaded shelves. Hesitantly, he softly asked, where's the cupboard door? At the pony's puzzled look, Harry pointed to the side of the stairs. Cupboard? Twilight asked, puzzled. Harry swallowed. Yes. You know. The cupboard where you'll lock me in at night. His voice kept getting softer and softer at her uncomprehending expression. You know, for sleeping. Assuming she wasn't just going to tell him to sleep on the floor. Or was he assuming too much? Did she have a shed-out back she expected him to sleep in? Like the Dursleys sometimes did when they were especially angry with him or going somewhere for the weekend and didn't want to bother Mrs. Fig? She stared at him, appalled. Sleep in a cupboard? Her voice rose, incredulous at the idea. His mouth was suddenly dry as he shrank back under Fluttershy's wing and leaned against her. Yeah. That's where I slept at the Dursleys, he said in a very low voice. He thought and gave a slow nod, realizing that he was supposed to sleep outside. Surprisingly, Fluttershy hugged him tightly against her side with her wing, and whispered, "Oh, you poor thing," and turned her head to nuzzle his neck in a way that was oddly soothing. There isn't a cupboard under these stairs in this library, Twilight Sparkle said coldly. And even if there was, you wouldn't be sleeping there. Your bed is right beside mine, up there. She pointed a hoof. He sat down and stared up at her, and then up at the side of the alcove above. I'm sleeping in the same bedroom as you, he asked incredulously. In a real bed? Like a normal? He stopped dead. Her face rapidly went through several expressions but ended up smiling. Yes, you have a real bed right beside mine, she said emphatically. All he could say was, wow, in a very quiet wondering voice. He had never slept in a room with someone else before. Not even at Mrs. Fig's. Fluttershy was hugging him tightly, now. He had never been hugged like this before, that he could remember. Certainly, neither his aunt nor his uncle had ever hugged him. It felt awkward and almost uncomfortable, but at the same time it felt very nice. He didn't know what to do, so he did nothing and let her do what she wanted. He had to wonder why she was doing it though. While he was still thinking that through, Twilight Sparkle pointed to the door to the left of them. That leads to the basement underneath us, which is my laboratory. She gave him a severe look. Don't go down there without me, there are some very dangerous things down there, especially for a small colt like you. So, no exploring the basement. Got it? He nodded quickly, although he saw the three fillies exchanging looks. Scootaloo, especially, seemed interested in what was behind the door, and started slinking towards it. The kitchen came next, as did the downstairs toilet and sink in a room tucked beside it. There's another toilet upstairs with a full bath and shower, the purple unicorn said. Excuse me, Fluttershy said very quietly as she took a step into the toilet room and closed the door. Harry immediately sat down. He wasn't about to fall on his face again, tonight, not if he could help it. He would wait right where he was for her to come out. Scootaloo was the first to notice. She was in the middle of inhaling another muffin at the center table when she stopped and stared at him. First her eyes opened wide, then they narrowed. She almost said something, but then she didn't. Alarmed, Harry looked around before realizing her eyes were riveted to his hip. She trotted over, staring. He glanced down at his hip. He had already seen what she had just noticed. Right where all the other ponies had those strange tattoos, cutie marks, he thought they called them, he had a long scar in the shape of a lightning bolt. Back at the hospital he had taken the time to carefully examine Nurse Redheart's cutie mark, as she had called it. She had been quite proud of it, truth be told. It wasn't a simple tattoo where colored ink was used to stain the skin permanently, that wouldn't work with ponies. Where fur would simply cover up the artwork. Instead, the pony's actual fur was different colors. How they did that he wasn't sure, but he was positive that the answer was magic. However, in his case it wasn't a tattoo that made his fur a different color there was instead an actual scar carving its way through the fur, leaving a rift in the fur in the shape of a lightning bolt. If it weren't for the torn skin revealed, one might think that someone had merely cut the fur there close to the skin to make that lightning shape. What a shame, the nurse had said, when you get your cutie mark it will be defaced by that awful scar. Who would do such a thing to a foal? Knowing nothing about cutie marks nor what they meant in this pony society, he hadn't really understood what she meant. To him, it was just a scar, like the one on his forehead. Oh. My. Sweet. Celestia. Scootaloo said, that's not a cutie mark. The other fillies quickly crowded over and studied it intently. The adults drifted over to look as well. Does it hurt? Asked Apple Bloom, gently touching the scar. Harry shrugged. Nope, he said softly. Sweetie Belle looked a bit sick. She glanced at her own flank, then said in a half-whisper to her friends, I think there are worse things than having a blank flank. She moved around to his other side and gasped. There's one on this side, too. The others pushed around Harry and stared. Sweetie Belle leaned against him, nuzzling his neck. Apple Bloom moved to his other side and did the same. Scootaloo moved in front of him and leaned sideways across his front. She rubbed the back of her neck against his chin. Harry found that to be as confusing as it was comforting. Not that he was upset about the scar or anything, but having the three fillies just leaning against him somehow made him feel better. But why were they doing that? Were they doing it for him? Or for themselves? Fluttershy came out of the toilet room and smiled to see the three fillies grouped around him, comforting him. Until, that is, Rainbow Dash told her about his scars. Then she briefly sported a horrified look before transitioning to one of pity. She once more wrapped her wing around him and cuddled him close. He wasn't sure why. That was pretty much the official end of the party. Applejack was first to abandon them. Come along, Apple Bloom, it's getting time fair evening chores and then dinner. You know Granny will pitch a fit if we aren't there. Harry had to wonder just how much of a dinner they would eat after spending the afternoon stuffing their faces with sweets. On the other hand, Applejack hadn't seemed the least bit worried about Apple Bloom ruining her appetite by gorging on sweets before dinner time. Back in Little Whinging he had heard kids complaining about their parents denying them sweets when dinner time was close. Never having had that problem, himself, he had found himself envious of having someone care if he ruined his appetite. With the Dursleys, he was lucky that they remembered to let him eat dinner at all. I have to check tomorrow's cloud schedule, Rainbow Dash said. She flew up to one of the alcoves that had an open balcony and left. I'm so sorry, but my animal friends are expecting me home to fix their dinners, Fluttershy said softly, looking at Harry sadly. Rarity was next, and said apologetically, I have an important order to finish for tomorrow. And Sweetie Belle, she gave her sister a glare to get her to move from Harry's side, has homework she needs to finish. Reluctantly, Scootaloo said, Auntie Loft will be upset if I miss dinner again, and after one last nuzzle against Harry's neck headed out the door as well. The library felt oddly empty after they all left. Dinner was a salad that Spike previously had prepared and placed in their refrigerator, basically a big wooden box with a magic spell on it to keep everything in it cold. Twilight floated 3 big bowls onto the kitchen table and sat down. Spike hopped up onto a special chair that put him at the right height to eat. That left several other chairs grouped around the table. Apparently, Twilight frequently had guests over to eat. Harry managed to climb up onto the chair where his salad had been placed. He had to prop his 4 hooves on the table. And yes, he was right, Spike did eat jewels. But isn't that expensive? Where I come from jewels are not cheap, Harry said, staring. Nah, said Spike, you can find them all over the place out here. The expensive ones are the ones that can be enchanted. Harry shook his head wonderingly. Where I come from, jewels of any kind are valuable and expensive. And enchanting is what they look like, not something you do to them. He was amazed at the thought that what he considered valuable was as common as dirt. He looked around his bowl for any silverware. He was about to ask where the forks were when he noticed that Twilight had levitated the salad into her muzzle and started chowing down. He frowned as he watched her, then decided to give it a try himself. After several moments of nothing happening, Twilight noticed his difficulty and sighed. He felt a warmth around his forehead, and a moment later he saw a large ring float over to Twilight. "I don't think you need this anymore, do you?" Harry had forgotten about that thing after wearing it for so long. It was as if a fog had lifted from his thoughts. They were clearer now. He shook his head, and again turned to stare at his salad. "Spike, would you get Harry a knife and fork? He's a unicorn. He also has never used his magic before." Sighing, the dragon child grumpily got down from his chair and retrieved the utensils from a drawer. Twilight said quietly, "This is odd. This suppression ring is cracked." She held it up, rotating in front of her eyes. "It must have been defective." She gave him a contemplative look. "I wonder when that happened." A smile quirked her lips. "I guess we're lucky you didn't teleport away earlier, right?" She placed the broken ring on the table. Harry just stared back at her. Spike hopped back up onto his chair, sliding a knife and fork over to him. Using what he used to call his index finger, Harry managed to pick up the fork. At first, he was taken aback when he saw the dandelions in his bowl, but then, he reflected, that as an herbivore such things were normal. To his surprise, it actually tasted good. All too soon he found himself licking the bowl clean, which Twilight never said a word about, and that was in spite of stuffing himself earlier with muffins and cupcakes. The rest of the evening they spent with her teaching him how to levitate things. By the time he started yawning, and protesting he wasn't the least bit sleepy, he had managed to lift a bottle cork. He marveled that his bed really was right beside Twilight's. He had never felt anything so soft before in his life, and he fell asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. Going downstairs as a quadruped was not a pleasant experience, Harry decided. The moment his butt was higher than his head, his brain insisted he was about to take a header down the stairs and to immediately stand and go down the stairs standing upright, like a proper monkey. So, he did. And it worked just fine. He wobbled a bit, and there wasn't a railing to hold on to, but he made it. Unfortunately, the next time he went down the stairs, Twilight was watching and he tried to do it as a pony would. And ended up tumbling the entire way down. It wasn't too awful, that is, he didn't have a concussion nor a broken arm like the time Dudley had pushed him, but it was still disagreeable. It would take a lot of practice before he would ever feel comfortable doing that. He decided to learn how to teleport as soon as possible. If he could do it by accident, then he could bloody well do it on purpose. That way he could skip the stairs. Harry stopped the moment he saw the schoolhouse. It was as unlike the primary school in Little Whinging as he could imagine. It was a wooden building, red, with fancy decorations of lines and diamonds painted on the walls. Giant hearts had been carved into the walls and then windows placed in them such that the tops of the windows almost covered the hearts, leaving the hearts' tops and sides in view. The windows were tall and thin, easily double the height of the hearts, with a set of 3 visible on the side he could see. The roof was steep, with a bell tower capped by a heart and arrow-shaped weather vane, and the roof's edges were decorated with more hearts and curled lines. There was even a porch with its own tiny roof decorated exactly the same as the main roof. A flagpole was beside the building, featuring a galloping pony at the top and a red flag that ended with 2 points. It was, without a doubt, the most girly building he could imagine. And it terrified him. In Little Whinging he had been excited to go to kindergarten, at first. A chance to get out of the Dursley house and actually meet other kids. Kids that weren't Dudley's friends, kids that Dudley hadn't bullied into avoiding him. Kids whose parents didn't think he was a miniature hoodlum. That hadn't lasted the day. Dudley had either chased off anyone interested in being a friend or alerted the other bullies about a new victim. He was right back where he had been at the house, only with more bullies. And, rather quickly, the other kids had discovered he was the perfect mug. They could do almost anything they wanted, and as long as the teacher didn't actually see them do it, they could blame Harry without worrying about getting into trouble themselves. Even the nice kids took advantage of the get-out-of-jail-free card that blaming Harry gave them. Harry had discovered later that his uncle had sent a letter, via Dudley, to the teachers explaining that Harry was untrustworthy. That he was a liar and a thief. That if anything went wrong, it was most likely Harry at fault. And, for some reason, the teachers had taken what his uncle had said as gospel truth. Since then, every advance in grade had been with the same kids as the previous year. The kids who had been interested in being a friend had turned on him. He became the outsider, no one liked him, everyone was mean to him. Sure, there might be one or two new kids from families that had just moved to Little Whinging, but for the most part it was always the same group of bullies, almost everyone else in the class. And the new kids, perhaps being afraid of being treated the same as he was, went along with the group. Soon, they, too, blamed him for things they had done because they knew they could get away with it. Or they were mean to him because they needed someone lower in social rank than they were to vent their frustrations on. Was this going to be the same? Was he again going to be blamed for anything and everything that went wrong? Was he going to be alone in a group? "Are you all right, Harry?" She had noticed him shivering and the panicky look in his eyes. "There's nothing to worry about. You'll make lots of new friends. You already have 3 in Scuttaloo, Sweetie Belle, and Apple Bloom," Twilight said warmly. Harry wasn't convinced. After the previous night's total freakout, he wasn't so sure they would want to have anything to do with him. That's what would have happened in Little Whinging. Whoever had seen his meltdown would eagerly tell their friends while laughing, and then the entire class would spend days making fun of him. And ostracizing him. In addition to their normal, blame Harry, incidents. He took a shaky step forward and they slowly advanced to the school, with Harry dreading every step. Twilight kept encouraging and nudging him, but he didn't hear a word of it over the pounding of his own heart and fears. He wasn't like the rest. He was a person masquerading as a pony. Once again, he was the freak, the weird one in the bunch, the one who was different. They just didn't know it, yet. But when they did. This time everything was backwards. The unicorns could do magic, the Pegasi could fly, and the rest could make plants grow. All he could do was teleport when he was terrified out of his mind. He was a one-trick fake pony. Cheerily met them at the door. "Oh, good. You're right on time. Class will start in about half an hour and I want to go over a few things with you, Harry Potter." She looked over to Twilight. "You can stay, if you want." Twilight looked at the way Harry was shivering. "Yes, I think I will, if you don't mind." "Not at all. Come on inside." Inside, Harry could see that the school was divided into 2 classrooms, one on each side, with a small anteroom for cloaks and boots. "This room," she pointed to the left, "is for the older students, like you, Harry Potter." She gave him a quick smile. "The other is for younger students and my assistant, Miss Hackney, teaches them." Harry nodded jerkily. "What I'd like to do is for you to be up here by my desk when the school bell rings, then after every pony is seated, I'll introduce you. I'll tell them you just got out of the hospital yesterday and you might still be a little unsettled. All right?" Harry nodded in tandem with Twilight. "Your desk will be this one here," she said, walking into the classroom and placing her hoof on the back of a chair at the rear of the classroom. There were 12 desks, 3 across by 4 deep. His desk would be in the last row and in the middle. Each desk had a small stool to sit on. Harry nodded. "Now, then," she continued, walking to the front of the classroom, "you're more than a little behind the other students regarding Equestria's history, so you'll need to study hard to catch up." She looked back at him. "I'm sure your little friends will be happy to help you. And if they can't, Twilight can." Twilight chuckled along with cheerily. "Your reading is slightly above your age level, Harry Potter, so that will help. Unfortunately, you can't write with either your unicorn magic or mouth writing, so I'll have to give you remedial lessons after school until you're reasonably proficient." She looked at Twilight. "It'll be about an hour at first, then drop to half an hour for a while. Whatever help you can give him at the library will speed that up." She stopped and stared at Twilight. He's a colt. He doesn't have your single-mindedness. He needs time to play with his friends. No more than an hour a night. Okay. Twilight blinked, then nodded, yes, of course. Your math skills are quite good, Harry Potter. You're ready for secondary arithmetic already, a year ahead of your age group, which I'm told is almost 10. She looked back at Twilight. You might see if he has any interest in pursuing that, it would help with his spell casting, as you know. She turned back to Harry. I might ask you to help out some of the other students, if you think you wouldn't mind. Harry stared at her, momentarily stunned out of his nervousness. Him? Help others? He nodded several times. Yes, if you think I can help, he said shyly. Excellent, she said, very pleased. Well, why don't you put your school things in your desk while we're waiting? A few minutes later he was back beside her desk. Waiting for the school bell. Listening to the growing crowd of ponies outside calling and yelling to each other. He noticed a couple of ponies poking their noses into the room and rapidly retreating upon seeing him. He kept shivering. He tried to control it by locking his knees, but that didn't help. He couldn't stop taking small gasps of air, and then nervously swallowing, as he stood there, waiting and trying not to run out of the room in a panic. Finally, the minute hand of clock at the back of the room reached 11. Cheerily grabbed the rope in the room's corner closest to the hall, and her desk, with her mouth and yanked down. The bell above the school began to ring. Immediately he heard the stomping of hooves on the porch and running into the anteroom. Then several ponies boisterously burst into the classroom, hurrying towards their desks. The first 3 through the door stopped only steps into the room, causing a bottleneck as the ones behind them, not expecting the leaders to stop, crashed into them and knocked them all to the floor. Harry blinked at the pile of ponies at the classroom door. If he hadn't been so anxious, he would have laughed at the jumble. It took several minutes to sort out as the ponies outside tried to push their way in so they wouldn't be counted late and kept knocking down the ponies in front as they tried to stand back up. Cheerily just stood and shook her head ruefully. Twilight hid her grin behind her hoof. Finally, every pony was seated and staring at Harry. Except for the cutie marked Crusaders, of course, they were waving hello. They were in a group at the back, with Scootaloo and Apple Bloom sitting in front of Sweetie Belle. His desk was behind Scootaloo and beside Sweetie Belle. He smiled wanly at them, still taking small panicky gulps of air. His stomach hurt, too. Good morning, every pony. Good morning, Miss Cheerily, responded the class. She smiled broadly. Today, we have a new student, Mr. Harry Potter. She waved a hoof towards him. He's only recently arrived in Equestria, so he's going to need a bit of help in catching up with us in some subjects, such as equestrian history, geography, the princesses, and the nobles. Plus, he only got out of the hospital yesterday, so he is still a bit unsteady on his hooves. He's recovering from breaking his shoulders, so please, no roughhousing until he's completely recovered. She stared at a couple of the colts. Now, then Harry Potter, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? Harry startled and stared at her, wide-eyed. She hadn't told him she would do that. He looked out into the classroom and saw every pony looking at him expectantly. He opened his mouth, his mind a complete blank, and at first nothing came out. But then, something did. All that air he had gulped came back up. In other words, he belched. Not a simple small burp, like from an upset stomach or a soda. No, this was different. It was clear. It was loud. It was long. And he couldn't stop it. Harry had heard telly shows where foghorns blew in the background. This was deeper. This was louder. This was longer. He could feel the floor vibrating under his hooves. Or was it that he was vibrating against the floor? He imagined he could hear the windows shaking in their frames. He sat back and clamped both forehooves over his mouth the moment it stopped. He stared at Miss Cheerily, horrified. She'd throw him out for sure. She was staring back at him in astonishment, as was Twilight. The class stared at him in amazement. Most of the girls' shocked expressions slowly moved to frowns of disapproval, although more than a couple of the colts grinned widely in delight. One loudly said, "Wicked," and started to laugh. "That was awesome," said another, laughing as well. Soon, the entire class was laughing. Harry just stared at Cheerilee. It was only when the edges of her mouth twitched up and she said, "Well, that's a memorable introduction," that he started to relax. "Well," she continued after a pause, "you might as well take your seat, Harry Potter." "Harry," he mumbled, "just call me Harry." His face was hot with embarrassment, but at least his stomach didn't hurt anymore. She nodded, "Okay. Harry." And smiled. All three of his filly friends gave him hoof bumps as he sat, and broad grins. Scuttaloo murmured, "Wicked introduction," to him. Morning recess was a mob around Harry as they all tried to question him. He tried to be as honest as possible without revealing he had come through a portal. He didn't want them to think he was any more abnormal than he already appeared. Twilight waved goodbye as she headed off to do whatever it was she did. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, Diamond Tiara brought everything to a halt. "That's not a cutie mark. That's a scar. What happened to you?" She pointed at his flank as she, and everyone else, stared at Harry's butt, aghast. Harry shrugged as he shuffled, embarrassed at the attention to his naked butt. "I don't know, that's always been there." He tried to tuck his tail close. She looked around at every pony and asked, "Does that mean you can't get a cutie mark?" She shrank back, as if afraid she might catch a disease. Harry shrugged again. "Twilight said I should get a cutie mark when the time comes. And that it might even erase the scar when it does. Or not." He didn't care one way or another. He didn't understand what the fuss was about, he just wished they'd stop staring at his butt. The end of recess brought an end to that line of questioning. Lunchtime was fun. It was the first time he had ever had someone to play with on the swings and slides. And watching the Pegasi fly around playing tag was enlightening. You had to watch in all directions. As she had said, Cheerilee spent an hour with him after school teaching him how to hold a pencil in his mouth and write. The straight strokes weren't straight, and circles were impossible. But even he could see an improvement when they stopped. Twilight walked him back to the library while grilling him on his day. However, before he started on more practice, either with his mouth writing or his magic, she wanted to do an experiment. "I've spent all day devising these experiments, so we'll know where to concentrate our efforts." Twilight?" Harry asked nervously, "I normally don't question the scientific method, but are you really sure this is going to work?" "First off, the scientific method is a body of techniques for investigating the phenomena of our world. What we are doing is simply one step in that process," she replied airily while making sure the straps on Harry's colander helmet were secure. Wires came out of it to the boxy desk his forelegs were propped against, and thence to some equipment at the side of the room. "Secondly, I know this will work. The Hooves Gate test is the most accurate and well-known magical analytic test in existence." Harry gave Twilight a worried look. "Now, because I'm doing a test on your magic, you're going to feel a slight tingle just under your fur." Twilight put a pair of welder's goggles over her eyes and then gloves. No, gloves were for hands, those must be socks on her front hooves. They looked to be made of RBB. Those were for protection from the electricity, he supposed. He only now noticed that she had thigh-high work boots on her rear legs and was wearing a rather thick lab coat. "This tingling is normal, but please say something if you feel a burning sensation." "All right," she said soothingly. "What's with the goggles and that outfit?" he asked worriedly. "Safety first," she said kindly as she pulled down a large electrical lever. Harry was not reassured. He winced as the lever clicked home. The test was, well, it was strange. Harry squirmed a bit and tried to keep from laughing, but it wasn't easy. It felt as if someone had taken a feather and was using it to tickle every square centimeter of him. Thankfully, it only lasted for 10 seconds before Twilight switched the machine off and moved eagerly to the printout that was now spewing from an opening on the side of the machine. He was very relieved to discover that his scar had barely hurt at all, just a mild warm feeling on his forehead. "Well," Twilight said after perusing the printout. "You seem to have a normal affinity for magic. The magic surrounding you, a shield, for want of a better word, isn't hostile and seems quite passive. However, the spell fragment in your forehead is hostile and the shield is only active at that location. The two seem to be in equilibrium with one another. The shield is powered by itself, apparently, which should be impossible. I suspect my test isn't sensitive enough, which would mean that the ambient magic in the world is supporting the shield. And, being ambient magic, it shouldn't be powerful enough to do that." She looked up at Harry. "You said you've always had that scar, so that must mean that there is magic in your world, or both the spell fragment in your scar and the shield would have fallen apart long ago." She danced a little quick step, spinning in place, grinning broadly with her eyes wide and gleaming. "Oh, this is so exciting. A self-sustaining shield without runes." She looked over at her equipment. "I'll get started on modifying this for tomorrow." She sighed happily. "You, on the other hoof, should start practicing your mouth writing." Harry sighed and headed upstairs. Twilight?" Harry asked nervously. "I normally don't question the scientific method, but are you really sure this is going to work?" "First off, the scientific method is a body of techniques for investigating the phenomena of our world. What we are doing is simply one step in that process," she replied airily while making sure the straps on Harry's colander turned into a helmet were secure. "Secondly, I know this will work. The Hooves Gate test is the most accurate and well-known magical analytic test in existence." Harry looked at the straps securing his forelegs to the equipment he was leaning against. He gave Twilight an apprehensive look as she tugged on the rear leg straps to make sure they, too, were secure. He was well and truly bound in place. "Now, since I'm doing a test on your magic, you're going to feel a slight tingle just under your fur." Twilight giggled oddly while putting a pair of welder's goggles over her eyes and then black gloves. No, gloves were for hands, those must be socks on her front hooves. They were thickly quilted RBB, he thought. He only now noticed that she had thigh-high work boots on her rear legs, shiny black boots that looked sturdy enough to wade through lava. She levitated a bulky white lab coat over her torso. According to the telly shows, lab coats with stiff quilted crisscrossed stitching were usually lead-lined. "This tingling is normal and nothing to worry about," she continued. "But please say something if you hear screaming that isn't you, you start seeing dead ponies, or you feel as if your horn is being ripped out of your skull, all right," she concluded sweetly and much too cheerfully. He was becoming seriously alarmed and would have left, if he could, especially after that last statement. "What's with the goggles and that outfit? And is all this," he nodded and tugged at the straps as he asked nervously, "really necessary?" He gulped. He was even more immobile than he had been in the casts at the hospital. "Safety first," she shouted as she grabbed a large electrical lever and laughed maniacally. "Prepare to do science," she yelled enthusiastically as she yanked the lever down. Harry was not reassured. Harry wondered why she didn't use her magic to pull the lever. Harry winced as the lever clicked home. There was a moment's thoughtful silence. Then he screamed. Twilight reflexively slammed the lever to the opposite position. "Harry," she yelled, panic-stricken. He slumped back into the chair. His head lolled to the side, eyes almost closed. I'm sorry," she shouted as she darted over to him. "Where are I hurt?" She began frantically casting diagnostic spells. He cracked an eyelid wider open and looked at her, grinning widely. "Gotcha," he whispered. Then he started to laugh. Twilight stared at him uncomprehendingly. Slowly, she sat back onto the floor. "You should have seen your face," he said, between bouts of laughter. "You should see your face, now," he amended, laughing even harder as he tried to point a strap-restrained hoof at her. Later, as he hung magically stuck by his hooves to the basement ceiling, he shouted, I regret nothing, nothing, I say. He chortled. Oh, God, her expression. Priceless. Up above, he heard the library door open and hoofsteps enter. They came to a slow stop. After a moment, he heard Applejack say, Twilight. Why is your basement giggling? So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 4. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author tkepner on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.